Welcome to Cutting Down the Nets. This is the final show of the season as we look ahead to the future. In the year 2000, we are looking at future bets for next year and basically a strategy on how to do this. When do you bet? How much do you bet? All those things that you need to consider when making future wagers. I recorded this initially last week, but I couldn't release a future show during Masters Week. Like, that's blasphemy. So now the Masters is done. Let's put one final thought into college basketball for the time being. And this is not a pick show. This is more strategy. And at the end, I do have the four futures I've played and other ones that I'm monitoring. But overall, I want you to just learn a little bit about the approach to betting futures, how much to bet, when to bet, why to bet, and all that sort of stuff. So it should be fun. I hope, just like any of the other content I've provided, at the end of this, it just makes you a little sharper than you were before it started. And it's certainly beneficial for me as well. Let's get to it. How much should you bet? I would recommend about 2 units. So if you bet $100 per game, I would bet approximately $200 across all future bets. In this example, we'll say that you bet $50 a game, so we're going to budget $100. My goal is to at least 4 or 5x my money. That way I only have to be right, like twice a decade. You can change this, and you can aim higher than that, but then it's hard to spread out your risk amongst multiple teams. So if our example budget is $100, then our example goal would be a 5x return of $500. Here is an example of 5 different bets that total up to $100, which was what our budget was, and the stake varies depending on the return. So a $10 bet at 50 to 1 returns $510. If you're betting a 10 to 1, put $50 on it, so that would return, in that example, $550. So it's not an exact science of like this has to make the total ticket worth $500, but you kind of get a feel for it. I bet a lot of golf futures. That can be maddening because you might have the 2nd, 3rd, 5th, and 9th place golfer that will pay $0 at the end of it, and some 7 to 1 favorite just wrote it, crushed the field by 3-4 strokes, and you might have had closing value in all your bets, but what do? Basketball is a little different because we have some decision points during the season to either let it ride or hedge off our future bets. Timing and strategy. I would recommend the best lines are probably going to be available right now, but tying up money for a year sucks. So you have to kind of balance that and pick and choose. And ultimately, I'm picking a few right now, and then I end up monitoring and may add. But there are different spots to make future bets. Right now, you want to be focused on transfers, recruits, who hired an agent, who didn't, because books are slow to react to these changes. If you have an injury during the season, that line will adjust immediately. I think in this time of year, you typically have 24 to 48 hours to react to major news of a transfer or a recruit committing or a player electing to stay, that type of stuff. In the fall, I would look to buy low. Again, the goal is to get some closing line value here. You want to be holding a ticket at a number that when the tournament starts, it is far worse odds than what you got it at. So 50 to 1, and then the tournament starts like, oh yeah, they're 12 to 1 to win the national championship. That's a good position to be in. Haven't accomplished anything yet, but you're on a path, and that is important. In the winter, you can probably find some spots to buy low, just with a slow start, maybe an injury. You're looking for teams with good statistical profiles that might not have the wins and losses, and a good upcoming schedule. The issue here is books are also slow to react, meaning they're not just going to take that preseason 25 to 1 and make them a 50 to 1. just because they got off to a slow start. So it's an opportunity, though. Typically, I'm looking at very early bets primarily, and then we'll talk about tourney matchups and betting futures during the tourney and how that's a different strategy. So if you're going to bet primarily right now, you need to understand who the transfers are, how many there are, and where they are looking to land, and who are the high value targets. Here's a list of evanmaya.com. He is a younger guy that produces like a unique analytics, and I use his site for both team and player level data. And this is who he had kind of as the better of the transfers. So you would want to be monitoring where these type of players went. We have had a few land. Xavier Johnson went to Indiana. Marion Jackson went to Arizona State. Bart Torvik does the same thing. I'm sorting by his PRPG. I forget what he refers to it as, but this list looks real similar. You'll see similar names on it, like the good players are the good players. And it's important to know who those are so that when they commit, you can estimate what type of impact they would have on a team. This slide is to show you that preseason odds of roughly 10 to 15 seem to be the sweet spot for a team winning the national championship. However, this is preseason odds. This isn't April before the season started odds. So your goal is to get 30, 40, 50, 60 to 1s that ultimately end up down here and can cut down the nets. You will see a few anomalies. One of these is Kemba Walker's Scorched Earth tournament. I don't remember if it was a 70 to 1 or 40 to 1. But overall, good teams win the national championship. That doesn't mean you can't bet on teams that ultimately don't cut it down, but maybe make a deep run and give you some hedging opportunities. We'll talk about how to handle that. So, a final strategy. When you bet a future, you hold that ticket and it has zero value unless they cut down the nets. They have to win. If they lose the championship game, you might have had all the closing line value. It's 60 to 1. It's a great number, but if you didn't act on it and they lose, you have nothing to show for. Here are 4 teams from this year's tournament, and this is looking at the strategy of betting 100, taking the winning ticket, rolling it over, and continue going. Okay? Gonzaga, $100 in the first round would have brought back $143. You then combine that and bet $101.43 for them to beat Oklahoma. Now you got $7.24 coming back. And now you can bet $108 on them to win their Sweet 16 game against Creighton, and so on and so on. Ultimately, if you employed that strategy with a team like Gonzaga and all of the large favorite situations they were in, and they won the national championship, that would have been about 1.4 to 1 odds. Not good, Bob. Not good at all. So, did they have a little bad luck? Yeah, they could have played Michigan or Alabama here, but I mean, that's going to bump that to like 3 to 1, maybe 4 to 1. And their pre-tourney odds were certainly more attractive than that. Same scenario for Baylor. If you rode them the whole way through, would have returned about 7.4 to 1. Again, not as good as their odds. Houston. This situation, riding it all the way through, produced 29 to 1. Their pre-tourney odds were somewhere in the 20s. So this was a little bit of value, and probably not enough for it to be like worth it. And at some point you'd have to decide if you were hedging out. And yeah, it's a strategy. Now here's something interesting to think about. Wisconsin. Wisconsin was in the 8-9 game against North Carolina. They were an underdog. They were plus 120. Round 2, they drew Baylor. Round 3, Villanova. Round 4, Arkansas, and so on, ultimately being plus 400 in the championship game against Gonzaga. So if you had rolled it over to that point, you'd have about $7,500 on them to beat Gonzaga, or you would have $7,500 and you walk away at that point. But had they beat Gonzaga at that number, now you're looking at a Wisconsin 371 to 1 ticket, which I assure you was not available at any point for Wisconsin during the season, before the season, early before the season last year. It just didn't exist. But what if you had 7,500 at this point? You could just quit. You could quit earlier than that. I mean, this is all up to your risk. But if you had that mindset of like, no, I want them to roll it over, it just shows you that there are spots to kind of bet this live and ride versus locking in a future wager at 45 to 1. Okay? My personal strategy, I look for elite mid-majors that have paths to 1 seeds, maybe 2 seeds at really good numbers. Last year it was Houston and San Diego State. Houston brought everybody back from a team that was top 10 in offensive and defensive efficiency. San Diego State nearly went undefeated in 2019, brought everybody back, had a good recruit. Those were bets I was looking at. Could they win the national title? Yeah, I really believe they could, or I wouldn't have made the bet. But it was also a way to get exposure to a 1 or a 2 seed, maybe a 3 seed at really good prices. So to me, it was worth it. I also look for middle of the pack major conference teams. I did not bet Michigan last year, but Michigan was preseason 6th in the Big Ten. They ultimately get a 1 seed. So you're looking for really good teams that have decent numbers. I mean, it's not rocket science. But choosing them and why you're choosing them does become important. So this is where I went last year, April 8th, 2020. I landed on Texas, Houston, San Diego State, UConn, Iowa, Indiana, and Miami. What I was looking for was elite mid-majors, Houston, San Diego State, and then middle of the pack conference teams or major conference teams that had paths to winning their conference. Thought Texas, with adding Greg Brown, was good value at 45 to 1. So how did I do in guessing the value? Well, on August 10th, all the odds were worse. So I had closing line value on everything. But Indiana and Miami missed the tournament outright. However, some of these were real attractive. And ultimately, the way this ended up, 3 seed, 2 seed, 3 seed, 2 seed. UConn was a 7, despite missing their best player for a month. So good numbers on teams that ended up with good seeds, and ultimately it didn't matter. Gonzaga and Baylor were better than my pack, but I liked the pool I had, and those are the shots I take. This is Bart Torvik's projection. Still a lot of people in the transfer portal, but this is the offensive and defensive efficiency projections based on the players that have committed or transferred and returning players. And on his site, you can remove players. Like if you think that player ultimately goes to the draft, you can take him out of the pool. But he's factored in, like Moses Moody is not coming back to Arkansas. And you can add Chet Holmgren to Gonzaga and see what it does to their profile. You could add them to a different team and see what it does to their profile. So it's kind of fun. But ultimately, I'm looking for teams that finished or that are projected to be top 30 in both. You don't want a one-dimensional team like Iowa comes to mind. Iowa historically is a very good offense and a pretty poor defense. Champions come from that well-rounded profile of good offensive and defensive teams. So using this information and the strategies that I've talked about, these are the bets that I've landed on so far and teams that I'm monitoring. Number 1, I like Arkansas at 40 to 1. You've got Musselman, who now has some experience there. He always gets transfers, as he did at Nevada, and he already landed Audi's Tony from Pitt, and he landed Chris Likes from Miami, which is a huge get and a real nice fit for their style of play. So Arkansas at 40 to 1 was a bet I saw value in and locked in. Talked about elite mid-majors. Memphis was the best defensive efficiency team last year. They have more recruits coming in. They bring everybody back. This is a good team, and Houston will not be as strong. The conference as a whole is pretty weak. So what we're hoping for here is Memphis to get through with 1, 2, or 3 losses and play their way into that 2 seed, 3 seed conversation at 50-1. Let's do it. Let's go. Purdue 30-1. They have 2 quality big men, Ivy and Travion. The news is Travion's likely not going to the NBA, which is a big piece here. But at 30-1, Purdue had shown a ceiling last year. I mean, they ultimately played their way to a 5 seed. And when they struggled, you're playing 2 freshman guards 30, 35 minutes a game. Those kids are a year older now. They bring everybody back. They've got a good coach. This is a good value bet, in my opinion. Next up, Bama. So this is the second SEC team I've picked. I don't want to load up on too many. I like who Florida has added, and I don't want 3 SEC bets. So ultimately pulled the trigger on Bama at 4,500. They've got a outstanding recruit, J.D. Davison, coming in. And then they added a top 20 transfer from Furman. Noah Gurley is his name. So good value on Bama. Other teams I am monitoring and why I haven't bet them yet. Gonzaga, 8-1 feels like their ceiling, but all experts are leaning towards next year's team being better than this year's team. So it's a fair number. I just don't like to bet 8-1. If I'm betting 8-1, I've got to tie up a lot of money for a year. And how much could their odds really go down between now and pre-tournament? I mean, I think worst case pre-tournament, they go off at 6-1. And at that point, you decide I'm just out. So I'm watching, but that is not something I typically do. St. Bonaventure, 60, 66-1, depending on the book. Love Bonnie. They were a top 20 efficiency team this year. They bring everybody back. They're really good. They cost us a lot of money in round 1 against LSU. But ultimately, this team is very good, returns everybody, and I expect their offensive, defensive, their efficiency profile to probably be top 10-ish next year. The problem is they are playing in a conference that has St. Louis, VCU, Richmond. I just think there's paths to 4, 5, 6, maybe even 7 losses, and that caps your ceiling at a 4 seed. They don't have that Memphis path, in my opinion, unless they really take control of their conference, which I think is tough to do with the depth of that conference. Drake, we forget how good Drake was before everybody got hurt, and everybody got hurt at the same time. They add the coach's son, another great recruit, but current price is 75-1. I would look for 150 or 200, and I don't know if it'll ever come, but it's something I'm looking at to see if we can get some value on Drake. Chris Beard's first year at Texas. Don't love to bet coaches in their first year, but I've done it before and not opposed to it. I'm interested to see how the transfers shake out. Just kind of how that works, who he gets. He certainly has landed a lot of big transfers in the names of assistant coaches who are also really good recruiters. But this might be a year early on Texas, but the current numbers are awesome. Indiana talked about how they landed Xavier Johnson. They also bring back Trace Jackson Davis, first-year coach, but could be a good number there. I don't have a number at my book yet for them, so when it appears, it'll probably be a number that's not worth betting, but it's something I'm looking at. Seton Hall, similar story. They added Syracuse's guard that Boeheim refused to play, Kadary Richmond. They bring back a lot of key pieces. They did lose Mamu to the NBA or graduation. I think he was a senior anyway. I don't have a number on them, but if it was triple digits, I'd be interested in that. Colorado State, I think it's similar to Bonnie. where their conference is good enough that they'll incur enough losses to not have a path to a 1 or 2 seed, but they're on the radar. Virginia Tech, the number's just not good enough right now. It's 30, 35 to 1, something like that. So that could be a fall bet for me once, the odds get boosted for Duke and all their recruits, North Carolina. Louisville will get some buzz. So if I can get a preseason prediction of Virginia Tech at like 8th, and then odds that correspond to that, something I may be interested in. Arizona was shaping up for me until Sean Miller got fired. So I'm interested to see who they pick for a coach. But you had a team that analytics liked last year, and they had no chance of playing in the tournament because of suspension or probation, whatever they're on. And I don't know. They bring back the right pieces. If Miller stayed, it felt like, okay, this is shaping up for a run, and prices were in the like 60 range, but now it's a little too volatile to me. So overall, there's my strategy. This is what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to find a good number on a 1 or 2 seed. Yes, you want the upside of cutting down the nets, but I've shown that there are paths to buy your way out of these things starting in the Sweet 16, Elite 8. So you need Sweet 16, Elite 8 teams, and the easiest way to get those is with projected 1 and 2 seed paths versus, this team's probably going to be a 6 seed or a 7 seed or an 8 seed. Showing you how difficult that would be. Now, if you still like a team after they get a seed like that, that's where I'd look at live betting in the tournament, rolling over money lines, and trying to turn that into some profit. So, my advice, 2 units worth of bankroll on futures entirely. Try to 5x your money. Then you only have to be right like twice a decade to be profitable. And it sucks to tie up money for a long time. So really be selective in who you are locking in right now, unless you just want some speculative ads for super low dollars. So that's how I bet futures. I enjoy betting futures, but got to win, got to cut down the nets, or you got to find a path out of the bet late in the season. So that is it for the year. What you can expect for cutting down the nets next year is probably not much in the first month of the season. I need to get some data for my model to begin to work. And then we'll attack like usual. I look forward to seeing you all again. Thanks for making it a great year, and thanks for stopping by Cutting Down the Nets.